All right, let's jump right into your engagement. And remember, at the end of this video, when I finish it, I will send it to you along with a long list of tips and important things to remember from this conversation. But I do want to remind you of the most important thing on this screen, and that is the download button, because you can only go back 1 year in data for your engagement within your Facebook group. And unfortunately, once it's gone, you can't go back and get that anymore. So we do encourage all of our clients to download data at least quarterly in order to have a backup copy of that data, and also so that you can then look at the trends over time and not just go back 1 calendar year. Because as we all know, the retail schedule, between January and December, it's a very different story between the first quarter, the second quarter, the third quarter, and the fourth quarter. And so your data is going to tell you a story, which is really important throughout the calendar year. But it's really cool to be able to go back and say, okay, what happened during the second quarter last year? What did it look like during the second quarter of the year before? So that you're not really comparing apples to oranges at that point. You're still looking at apples to apples when looking at that same quarter in a different calendar year. That's such a rich part of the story of the data that goes into this. And so being able to understand that and look at those similar time frames over time is just a critically important thing to do. So again, we will always remind our clients to download a copy of their data here at least quarterly so that they have that backup copy in case something happens, but also so that you can extrapolate and look at those trends over time. So looking at your group, this does default to the last 7 days. You can change that, so effectively it's the past week, month, 2 months, or the custom, again, you can go back to a year. You can set the date range here in this little tab. And then I'll go through each of these sections. They're all quite important. But let's start with the past 28 days because I think that's just a manageable way of looking at this. The last 7 days doesn't really tell you a whole lot. It's a very limited story. So let's look at the last 28 days to really have a nice rich look at what's going on here. And so today being January 6th, and this data typically tends to be about 2 to 3 days behind. So it looks like our last data point here is January 3rd. So that is 3 days behind. And so what this is saying is in this top part in engagement, it's clicking to just the posts that people in our Facebook group have made. And so we see 331 posts over the past 28 days. So you're averaging about 10 posts a day. You've got comments that you can look at in terms of how many comments per day, how many reactions per day. So that's your group members liking, hearting, all that kind of stuff. And then you can also look at the all view, which looks like kind of abstract art hot mess right now, but this can actually be really helpful in looking at how different variables correlate together. You can see that the green line here, which is your comments, and your orange line here, which is your reactions, have some really cool parallels here. Like you can see the upward slope here, the downturn here, and then you see these crazy outliers here. So it's just really interesting to look at all of that data. But going back to posts, this is saying that over the past 28 days, 331 posts were made, which is a decrease of 45% versus November 9th, 2022, December 6th, 2022, which was the 28-day period prior to the one we're analyzing right now. That's a huge decrease. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It could just mean that there's different types of posts. The month before could have been tons of wall drops. It could have been tons of engagement posts. This doesn't tell a story in and of itself, but it is an interesting data point saying that over the past 28 days, there's half as many posts as there were in the month prior. And so this is a good way of holding yourself accountable to saying, okay, am I being consistent in how much I post? Looking at the comments, it's almost identical to the decline in the number of posts in the same period. So we have fewer posts for the group members to engage with and comment to, so they're not doing it. And so I think that's, again, another way to hold yourself accountable to saying, okay, look, I have, let this drop off. What am I doing to increase this? Just an important, way of looking at it. And then reactions also consistently down a little over 45%. So between 45 and 50% consistently for posts, comments, and reactions over the past 28 days. So that tells a very clear story there for you. And when you are looking at any of these data points, you can stop over any of the different dates here, and it will tell you which date you're looking at and also how many posts, or whichever data point you're looking at, whichever variable rather. This shows you on December 31st, there were only 4 posts. This shows you here that on December 29th, there were 75 posts. And, just kind of intuitively thinking about what that might mean that it was an end of year posting extravaganza, and there were 75 posts that day. Let's see what comments looked like on that same date, which was December 29th. On December 29th, there were 87 comments, which is not anywhere near as high as you might expect for having posts at 75. But what if it took a couple of days for those posts to really start seeing some engagement? That would help explain the sharp increase here, and perhaps people were commenting on some of those 75 posts from December 29th on the 31st and the 1st and the 2nd and the 3rd. So you can see how the commenting engagement was very high in the days immediately following, but the post volume was way down here. So that does make me think that either these were some very, very high comment posts, or people were engaging with some of these posts over time, or both. And so again, it's important to look at not just one isolated data point, but look at the story being told by the posts and the comments and the reactions, which are paralleling the comments really well here. Again, that activity peaks after that big post was made on the 29th. Got some reactions, but then that really spiked up here in the days afterwards. So, that's just really interesting to me to see. And just for giggles, if you want to go back and let's look at the past year's worth of data. Again, today is January 6th, so I can only go back 365 calendar days. All the way. Oops. And it won't let you go in the future. That would be amazing, but here we are. So January 6th to January 5th, which is the last day that it has data for, because today is the 6th and it's not over yet. And again, because it is always 2 to 3 days behind, you're probably going to get about 364 days worth of data, so don't get too hung up on that. But here's what it looks like for posts volume in this group over the course of a calendar year, January to January, which is, interesting to look at how that fluctuated throughout the year. 4,795 posts, 28,000 comments. And this is a really great look at engagement from the people in this Facebook group in terms of what they were commenting to, because posts can go out there and disappear into the void and you'd never know what happened to them. Posts are posts. This doesn't mean a whole lot except what the actual admins of the group are doing. They're getting some content out there, but it says nothing about what people are doing or how they're reacting to it. Comments tell a very different story. They tell a story of a group that was having an uptick in engagement here. You see this upward trend in January, then it decreased and it stayed low. This is comment volume throughout the end of the first quarter, which ended here. So here's the end. Let's see which exact date. It's like right through here. So everything to the left of my mouse button is the first quarter. The first quarter was flat for comments, right? And let's look at the post volume. Still, it's pretty, except for this one spike where someone went bananas and had 189 posts this day. It was very flat as well. So then going to the second quarter, which starts right here. Boop. That's hard to find it. So the second quarter starts here on April 1st and then would end at June 30th. And so the comments had some spiky days where there were a lot of comments. On this date, on April 27th, there were 314 comments. Here there were 430 comments. So there were some very high traffic, high comment posts on those days. But in general, you can see that the overall trend is still to have very low comment posts, very low engagement from a commenting perspective. Let's look at the reactions. Reactions are all over the place, but still tend to have those lower reaction rates with some spikies up here that probably correspond with the comments of those peaks as well, which they do. See this 1, 2, 3. You also see 1, 2, and 3 spikes in reaction. So those are probably going to line up pretty well. Yep, they do. If you overlay them, those are the exact same posts that got a ton of comments and reactions on the 27th, the 11th, and the 14th of June. So what I would do as the group owner is go back and look at these posts that had so many comments and reactions. Like this one's really interesting because it had a ton of comments, but nowhere near as many reactions, right? That's super interesting. So I would go back to these posts and see what compelled people to hop on and look at that and try to understand that and try to replicate that. But that's the second quarter, still pretty flat for comments. And so then July 1st, then to September 30th, so we're going to say right about here. Yep. So from July 1st to here, so here to here is your third quarter. And you're starting to see over time, if you were to plot a trend line, it's starting to inch upwards a little bit. You're starting to see more engagement here. And this particular group happens to be a wholesale group. And so, we know that the wholesale buying season tends to be a little bit off from the retail buying season, but we are starting to see this uptick in interest and engagement here, which to me, I'd be thinking of, okay, it's July, August, September, people are starting to buy for the holiday season. And then we have October to December, we have tons of activity. And, this could be wholesale clients that didn't purchase ahead of time for the holiday season. It could be it could be any number of things getting engagement for the end of the year. What are you planning for your holiday sales? Or how are you planning to take advantage of this and that this holiday season? Let's have some challenges in order to meet your goals. This group did a really good job taking what they had between October and then December 31st, which is that fourth quarter. What were they doing? This is obviously a huge increase in the comments. It's an increase in the reactions as well. But interestingly enough, yes, there are more posts, but it's not the crazy spikes that you're seeing here or here in the comments or reactions. So maybe the posts are providing more value. Maybe this group has figured out how to tell a story that's more compelling and it's content that the users are finding more valuable. And so stacking that all on top of each other, really interesting. And because, let's do the last quarter just to stack that and really look at it, because this is a lot of really neat data. So October 1st, 2022 to December 31st, update that. So now we're going to have the last quarter of 2022. And you can see that the posts, comments, and reactions were up significantly from the third quarter. And that's pretty on brand, I would say, for a wholesale business in terms of the end of the year, the third quarter and the fourth quarter having that spike. If we look at the third quarter, I would expect there to be a nice increase as well because the second quarter is pretty dead. So interestingly enough, the post volume's not really up from the previous quarter, but the comments and reactions are. So again, it seems like a group that's struggling during this time frame, during that, this is the third quarter. They're struggling to really hit the mark in terms of, making the posts that are more impactful. They've not been able to make those changes at this time, but then heading into the third quarter, they did. So, super interesting. I find this all very fascinating, but that's enough for looking at the posts, comments, and reactions right here. Next, we'll go down to active membership. And for this, active membership is really a difficult thing to try to pinpoint because Facebook doesn't make it easy, right? They really, really, really don't. And what active member means is having a Facebook group member who is engaging with the group in some way. They're liking, they're commenting, they're really pausing to look at things. They slow the scroll as it is. And this can be very misleading in terms of what things look like. We're looking at posts, comments, and reactions and what that data looks like here. But during that same time frame, because if you look vertically, this is the same x-axis of dates as above. So when you're looking at what's happening in the data from left to right, it's the same time horizon. So they just put it on a separate chart so that you're not getting overwhelmed with the fourth line here. That would just be way too much data. But you can see that the active membership does not parallel what's happening up here. There's a different story to tell. And that's something that I personally really struggle with because here on January 3rd, there are 826 active members, yet there were only 10 posts. 136 reactions, 296 comments. But you can see that from January 2nd to 3rd, the comments went down, the reactions went down, the post stayed flat. So how did engagement almost double? So I do want to say, take caution when looking at this data and trying to really understand some of the nuances here because of the Facebook algorithm and because of the way that things show up on people's news feeds, and that changes weekly at least. We're never going to be able as, business owners to get that exactly right or to understand every single subtle nuance here. All we can do is make our best educated guess with the information that we have and try our best to stay on top of that by learning from our posts that have a certain trend of comments and reactions, what's going to make our active membership higher. And so the question is, in this group, looking over the course of a year, what did their active membership look like? Did it increase over time or decrease over time? So we saw that here's the data we looked at earlier from the posts, comments, and reactions over the course of a year. Now we can see the active membership over the course of the year. You can see that the summer is dead, and then it picks up towards the end of the year, and it's got lots of spikes. It's really difficult to see what the correlation looks like up here, though, with the posts, comments, and reactions because there's just so much data. So one thing I really like to do when looking at a longer time horizon of active membership and the posts, comments, and reactions, I like to get away from the all and just look at the post to begin to see where I can find the correlation. Does my active membership count look like it has a whole lot in common with the post volume? I mean, there's a little bit of a correlation there, but it's not a direct, that's obviously a slam dunk. That's why I have more active membership here. I don't think so. Because here we have higher active membership. On these days we had 400 active members, 795 active members, but look at how low the posts were. The comments were lower. The reactions were lower. So why was active membership so high right here? And that's something to dig into. But I do see quite a few similarities of the peaks, which are the high points, and the troughs are the low points of my data. I'm seeing some corresponding dates here. You can see what's happening with these peaks and troughs, the low points here. And so there's some correlation between the active membership and the reactions, which kind of intuitively makes sense, right? If one of the benchmarks or standards of an active member is someone who is engaging and reacting and commenting, you would expect to see some correlation between the comments, the reactions, and the active membership. The number of posts is really, an administrative facing thing. There's going to be more comments the more posts they are, probably. But for sure, if there's more comments and more reactions, then by definition, you have a more active membership base. And so one thing I will say about this group in particular, I do know that they shrank the group by 1,000 members right around here. When it was really slow, they purged over a third of the Facebook group and engagement immediately increased. And so that is something really interesting to discuss, and I would love to do so with you.